actually going to turn it over now to Michelle Schwartz, who is our Military Family Services Coordinator in the DC Capital Region of the United States. And she's going to introduce our guest speaker for us today. Michelle?
Hey, Joanna, thank you. And I just wanted to say welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for all of you for attending and taking this step in taking a proactive approach to your own mental health and your family's resiliency. I did want to give kind of a brief background on how this program came to be. Myself and our local volunteers were hearing a lot of feedback from local families about some of the difficulties they were experiencing with their transition coming from Canada to the U.S., you know, experiencing feelings of loss and grief and anger, and just how that was reverberating through the family and impacting their wellness overall. So I was approached by a volunteer here about how to use the book, The Emotional First Aid Kit by Guy Winch, as basically the foundation and starting point for a program. Now, we took that to the ACS Family Advocacy Program and to Megan Reed, who is presenting today, and they just ran with it. So it was a fantastic collaboration, and we are so very grateful that they've taken this amazing approach, and we're just so willing to help us out and help our community and create this program for them. And so for that, Megan, I am so thankful, and I want to welcome you here today.
Okay, so Megan, I'm going to pass you the ball, and we'll let you get started. Give me 1 second to get it to you. There's so many names here. It's wonderful. All right, you're ready to go.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I am so excited to see all of the places from which all of you are joining me today. I don't know if you noticed, but when we were putting up our little green check mark of who has never done a WebEx class before, I had my own check mark up. So this is a new experience for me, and I'm really excited to try out this platform for one of our classes. I'll also say that when Michelle approached me with this book and with the idea for this class, that was the first time I had actually read through it. And I've actually been kind of a little obsessed with it since then and kind of recommended it to clients and members of my family and my friends. So I hope that you guys find the tools that are in this presentation as useful as I have. It's a really great book and a really great basis for the topic. So I'll just go ahead and get us started. I'll also mention that again, that we'll hold questions till the end, but I will provide opportunities to participate using the chat function mostly, so you guys can be prepared for that. Okay. Okay, so living abroad, this is how all of this started, was some of the difficulties that can come from living abroad. But it's not just difficulties that we see when we come to a new place. There's a lot of excitement that can happen too. Especially when you first get there. You're in a new culture, there's food to try, there's new restaurants, new local coffee shops that might interest you, different music, different attractions like museums, you know, fun activities and parades that take place traditionally in your new community. And all these things can feel really exciting at first. But then there's also that stressful aspect to relocating. And this is one where I've titled this slide Living Abroad, but I feel like I could also easily retitle this slide Relocating with the Military, just kind of in general, because this is something that we see with our families, even when they're not relocating abroad, but within the continental United States. There's a lot of stress involved with the transition and trying to get yourself resettled. Some of the stressful things are just the absence of the familiar. You had built a lifestyle, friendships, a routine, a schedule in your previous duty place, and you've been taken away from that, and that can feel strange. And then you are in that different environment. There's a different healthcare system, different schools, different expectations. Maybe you had different expectations coming here, and those expectations aren't being met. So that's where we see some of the difficulties resulting from the transition of moving. And we find that there are three stages to culture shock when you're traveling, or again, relocating in general. And the first stage has a lot of that excitement in that we talked about, the honeymoon phase, where you're in these new experiences. It's exciting, it's intriguing. there's just a lot of new things to explore and do, and there might be a lot of busyness trying to get things situated that might kind of distract you from the reality of being in a new place. But the honeymoon phase doesn't last forever, of course, in our interpersonal relationships and while traveling or relocating. The next phase we call the emptiness phase. This phase is a lot harder for people. The excitement has kind of faded. You've sort of settled within your new routine, and you're just kind of feeling that you're feeling dislocated and you're feeling uneasy about it. Some of the symptoms that we can see in this phase are actually kind of similar to what you might see in depression. So feelings of anger, irritability, feeling the loss of your sense of humor, not really being excited about your hobbies.
Megan, we lost your audio.
Oh, no. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can? Okay, great. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, we can hear fine. Okay, good. Okay,
Never mind. Maybe it's just me. Sorry.
No, okay. I'll step back just a second in case anybody missed anything. So I'm on the emptiness phase, talking about some of the symptoms that you might see during this phase, and some of the symptoms that are very similar to depression. So there's the frustration, the irritability, and then negative feelings, negative thoughts and feelings about the people and the culture of your host country, or of the people that have a different culture in your new place. And then also boredom and fatigue and an inability to concentrate or work effectively. Some of these symptoms can actually be compounded too in the winter months like we're experiencing right now. The holiday season has kind of passed, and the excitement that can come with that has passed, or you may have found the holiday season to be very difficult because you're geographically isolated from your family or your friends, or from the friends that you had at your previous location. The weather and the time change during the winter months can also make it just more difficult to engage in new activities in the host community because it's cold outside and it's dark in the evenings, and it can be a lot harder to kind of motivate yourself to get out the door. Then that lack of sunlight, that lack of vitamin D does affect us and can kind of increase that isolation. And again, sometimes this can lead people to feel those symptoms of depression. There's a type of depression sort of popularly known as seasonal affective disorder, and that's where people with depressive symptoms find themselves re-experiencing that at this time of the year. So the difficulties of the emptiness phase, along with this time of year that just can be a little bit more difficult to get out the door and to try new things and to engage, can make it pretty difficult. And then, thankfully, the last phase that we have is the acceptance phase, and it's kind of marrying the two phases, the excitement that you felt in the beginning, and then sort of just the acceptance that you're in this new place and that maybe it will be a little difficult at first, but you find that you have more hope about what's going on. So if you are somebody that has recently relocated, somebody who's recently relocated abroad, go ahead and with the emoji function, with the little faces, if you could tell me what phase you think you're in today right now. So if you're in the honeymoon phase, put up a smiley face. If you are in the emptiness phase, put up the smiley face with the sunglasses. And if you're in the acceptance phase, put up your coffee cup. Coffee cups. That's lovely to see. So many coffee cups. And some smileys with the glasses. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we've got people kind of at different phases of this, experiencing all kinds of parts of this. Okay. So the emptiness phase, of course, is that phase that brings up a lot of difficulty for us. And so we're asking ourselves, how can we cope with the stress of the emptiness phase? And really our success in moving through the emptiness phase to that acceptance phase does depend on our ability to cope with that phase. And of course, there's two different ways to cope with anything. We can cope negatively or we can cope positively. So some of the ways that you might see someone coping negatively, some of your clients, or things that you may see within yourself, are becoming more withdrawn, more isolating, a lot of difficulty to motivate yourself to get out of the house. So you're just kind of self-isolating and you kind of get stuck in a cycle of doing that. Another thing is suppressing your emotions, just kind of trying to pretend like you're not feeling these feelings that the emptiness phase can bring. And then, of course, there's occasionally the increase in risky behaviors, like increase in alcohol intake to cope, or maybe lashing out with at loved ones, which can come from the suppressing of the emotions. So, of course, we want to try to avoid these negative phases or these negative coping skills because they really just kind of cause us more problems in the end, and they don't really resolve those feelings, that dissonance that we're feeling in the emptiness phase. So what we want to rely on are our positive coping skills, and those kind of coping skills come from building up our emotional health and from being proactive about our emotional and social health. And as many of you who have relocated probably know, your emotional health and your social health are really tied together strongly. So we'll talk about both of those aspects of your life and how to be proactive and some skills that you can use to build yourself up in these ways. And it's really that brought us to the Emotional First Aid book in the first place. Let me see also, we're all very familiar with using a first aid kit for our physical health, right? How many people here, just raise your hand, if in the last month you've used something that you might find in a first aid kit for your physical health? So things like Band-Aids, antibacterial cream, Tylenol for a mild headache, any of those kind of things you might find in your your physical first aid box. So I see a lot of hands of people that have used those things, and that's great, and that's because we're very comfortable healing our physical health or being proactive in healing our physical health. We're taught and encouraged to take care of these smaller discomforts ourselves to prevent them from becoming worse. If you don't treat that little paper cut on your hand, if you don't wash it and put a Band-Aid on it and put the antibacterial cream on it, you might find yourself getting an infection and needing to go to the doctor. But we've been taught the signs and symptoms of these little things and how to take care of them ourselves. Unfortunately, we have not had the same education for our emotional health, even though, just like our physical health, these little things we experience, we're also experiencing them in our emotional health. And much like our physical health, if they're left untreated, they can kind of fester and become worse and then become a problem that you might need to see a professional for. So what we want to do today is build up that emotional first aid kit. We all have that physical first aid kit. We need that emotional first aid kit now. So what we're going to talk about today is 7 minor psychological injuries or psychological wounds or sort of everyday hurts, things that people just encounter just from life. So we're going to define those injuries, and then we're going to suggest some treatments or how to build yourself up and be proactive for each of these things. And then for each of them, we'll also discuss when it might be important to seek professional help, if you find that things have gone on for a while and that you're having certain symptoms. So that will be sort of the structure for the next 45 minutes of our lives here. So the 7 psychological injuries we'll talk about today are rejection, loneliness, loss and trauma, guilt, rumination, failure, and low self-esteem. And I'll also mention that there's very practical tools, many of them journal activities or sort of like visualization processes to do to kind of help treat these wounds. And everybody will receive a copy of the PowerPoint via email. So if you need to look back at these really tangible tools, if you find one that you think would work for you, you'll have that information also at the end. And I would highly, highly encourage purchasing the book too, because he goes into much more detail about each one. All right. What I see, oh yes, rumination is not a word you hear all that often. I agree, but it's a very good word, and we'll make sure to define that one appropriately when we get there too. Because you're right, that one we don't see that all the time. Okay, loud noise. Okay, so the first one we'll start talking about is rejection. And this is, of course, one of the most common emotional injuries that we experience when you're abroad, when you're in a new community, because it's a common emotion you experience when you have to put yourself out there, when you have to go into a new community to make new friends and trying to stay connected And you know, the potential for rejection is always there, and that can be really scary for people. So what's the first? It creates 4 psychological wounds that are distinct, the rejection can. And the first one we have here is emotional pain. So what kind of emotions might you experience from being rejected? If you could type one in the chat function that you can think of, some of the emotions that might come with being rejected. Sadness, yes. Embarrassment is huge, yes. Frustration, yes, very true. Yes, those are all great ones. Sad, frustrated, lonely, confused sometimes. Yes, confusion, great. Yes, these are all things that can happen, and in a complex way, sort of, you know, you're feeling multiple emotions at the same time. And really, it's even small rejections that can hurt us and really impact our ability to think logically and clearly in other areas of our life, too. So the emotional pain is real, and it does affect us, emotionally and cognitively. And then also the anger and aggression. Anger is an emotion, but it's one of those pretty complex emotions, and that can cause us to kind of do, you know, do things like lash out at people, lash out at the ones who rejected us, or innocent bystanders, loved ones. You may find yourself being aggressively venting to them or something like that, which isn't ideal. And then, of course, a damaged self-esteem. That embarrassment, that's a big one that comes back for the self-esteem damage. So we have a tendency to take rejections too personally most of the time. And sometimes because we do that, we falsely assume that we've been rejected because we are unworthy, because we did something wrong, and sort of failing to see that sometimes there are other circumstance involved that created the rejection. Or perceiving a rejection, even when one may have not truly occurred, can also be a problem. And that can come from that damaged self-esteem. It also, of course, it threatens our need to belong, and it makes us approach future opportunities to have the same kind of healthy interactions with caution. So it can kind of cause us to pull back into ourselves and isolate, which will, you know, kind of become a cycle and cause more problems for us in the future. So lots of issues that can happen from this rejection, and a very, very common one, especially in a new community. So we'll start in with some of the treatment suggestions for these. Now, a lot of these treatment suggestions are great exercises to do with a journal, or again, I think I mentioned a visualization or thought processes. So some of them also come with a prescription summary, so it tells you kind of how often to engage in the activity, or what it would be best for. And so in some cases, I've added that information to the tool as well. So too often our need to understand what went wrong leads us to over-personalize or over-generalize the rejection. And then being self-critical only deepens the pain and then increases the healing time. So what we need to try to do is to meditate on self-kindness to treat this. So the first one we have here is argue with this self-criticism. So this is an exercise best probably done in a journal. So you would list the negative or the self-critical thoughts that are related to the rejection. And then you would list for each one of those thoughts a robust counter-argument for each one. And then whenever the critical thoughts return, you would immediately follow that with the counter-argument thought. So by doing this, we're trying to sort of logically talk ourselves out of these negative thoughts and then to replace them with positive ones. So I'll give you an example of what this might look like. Okay, so let's give an example of a situation that might make us feel rejected. So a potential new friend has failed to call me back. So a self-critical thought I could have was, she didn't call me back because she didn't like me, which is me kind of assuming how she feels about me, and in a very kind of specific way. But a counter argument to that may be that, you know, I don't know this to be true, that maybe, in fact, she copied my number down wrong. Maybe she miscopied down my number. Can you think of any other examples of a counter argument for this situation right here? Another reason why maybe this new friend was unable to call me back at the time. If you can think of one, please respond in the chat box. Yes, had an emergency. That's great. Yeah, she was busy. Too shy. Yes. Yes, I like too shy. So maybe it was, you know, some of her insecurities that led her to not want to call me back. Maybe she's having the same kind of anxiety I am about the relationship. Or she just plain forgot, she lost her phone. You know, sometimes we forget that life happens to all of us. Life happens to everyone. So these are great examples of a counter argument and how you would come back in and kind of try to talk yourself out of those self-critical thoughts. And then maybe another example of a self-critical thought I would have in that situation, because things kind of snowball, right? So first I think, well, she didn't call me back because she doesn't like me. And then maybe next a critical thought would come like, she doesn't like me because I'm boring, or because I'm not a fun person, or so then I'm making evaluations of myself. So then if you find that there are multiple self-critical thoughts, you'd want to come back in and swing back around with a counter argument for each one. To do this treatment. Okay, so that was treatment A. So now we have another exercise here that we can try out for rejection, and this we do to revive our self-worth. So you're going to make a list of 5 attributes that you highly value about yourself, and it's best to make these attributes relevant to the rejection as much as possible. So this activity, again, kind of forces you to meditate on the positive aspects of yourself and try to remove yourself from that cycle of negativity that we fall into after a rejection. So if I continued on with the previous example, you would want to keep this list relevant to your social skills. So you might say one of the attributes you enjoy about yourself is that you have the ability to make people laugh, or that you're a very loyal friend. So again, since it was a social rejection that you experienced, you'd want to keep those positive traits about yourself, about the social parts of you. And then if you want to further meditate on this, you choose the top 2 and you can write a short essay about each one, kind of answering the below questions. Why is the quality so important to you? How does this influence your life? Why is it important to your self-image? And again, this just kind of keeps you meditating on the positive. Okay. And then treatment C, this one is a little bit of a different angle. So this one isn't really a journaling activity, but this is one to try to help you kind of reconnect or reestablish those feelings of social connection. And you're going to do this in this exercise through substitutability. So everybody, let's raise our hand if we do not live near our best friend, your best friend in the world, if you do not live close to your best friend. Yes, I see lots and lots of hands, and this happens to us military folks so often. Our best friends, our family, they are not with us. But we still have that need to connect, and we still have that need to belong. Luckily, our need to belong has some substitutability, and that means that new relationships and new memberships and groups can actually replace those that have either ended because of a move or some other circumstance. So you can almost kind of like replace the social connection even if you've been, you know, kind of forced to end one of them. So they suggest you do some of this, and this is a thoughtful process, I would say, a visualization or thoughtful process called social snacking. So if you're unable to spend that quality time with your support group, the social snacking involves just recalling those positive social relationships and interactions by reading letters that you've received from your friend, or emails or texts, positive ones, looking at pictures of fun times, or watching videos of positive social interactions that you have. Really, it's any meditation on a socially positive connection that you've had. And then whenever possible, if you could increase the opportunities to engage in these social connections, either in person or online, that would also kind of help. So for example, if you can't meet with your best friend in person, maybe connect with your best friend and say, hey, I'd really like to be able to call you on Mondays at 5 p.m. while I commute home, just to stay connected. So setting something like that up can be really helpful if you're far away too. Okay, rejection treatment D. So this one, this one should be used with a little bit of caution, and I'd say that this one is actually kind of specific to people that have been experiencing rejection in the workforce, or from applying to new jobs and being rejected repeatedly, or if they have a job that just happens to have a lot of rejections by its nature, such as like a salesperson who's making a lot of cold calls to potential clients or things like that. So this exercise is to sort of try to desensitize yourself to the feelings of rejection. And an example of how this might work would be if you were an actor and you lined up an entire week of audition after audition after audition. So that rejection just becomes kind of more familiar and you take it less personally, and it just becomes more of a business-like experience. So I would say that this treatment method is really best for people in those specific circumstance with their employment or things like that. I don't know that this one would work as well across the board for people socially, though I think some people could respond really well to just kind of putting themselves out there repeatedly, and you know, and just the nature of repetition will help you take it less personal. But again, you know, you have to just kind of know your personality or your client's personality, and you know, to know if that one would be a good fit. So those are some suggestions for treatment. When to see a professional, if the rejection is profound, if there's chronic rejection over time, if you're applying these treatments and they're not helpful to you, you're continuing to be in emotional pain, if you're angry or aggressive, out of control, or if you ever have thoughts of hurting yourself or someone else, that would be a time to seek immediate medical attention. Okay. All right, so we've covered rejection. The second emotional wound we're covering today is loneliness. So this is a relationship, a muscle weakness. Again, this is something that is commonly experienced for people who have had to relocate. Again, they're distant from those relationships. In fact, it kind of goes hand in hand with rejection a little bit. Or we maintain our isolation or loneliness out of fear of rejection or something like that. So it can kind of be a little bit of a cycle between those two. And so loneliness is created when there's physical or even perceived distance. Social media can be helpful or harmful in cases of loneliness. You can use it as a tool to your benefit, or it can be something that just kind of makes you feel even more out of the loop, more distant from the ones that you love. You know, further back from those that are engaging. But it does have some pretty negative effects on your physical health. So there's cardiovascular problems that can happen, increased blood pressure, high cholesterol. The endocrine system can be affected, so the increase of stress hormones, which the body was not designed to kind of handle for long periods of time. Your immune system can be reduced. Some cognitive functions can be impaired, like impaired judgment, decreased attention and concentration, poor decision making. So not a good situation physically for our bodies too, to be in that lonely state for a while. So it's something that is experienced often, I would say, almost universally after a military relocation, but it's definitely something that you want to try to be proactive about, because there are these potential for a long-term, you know, for these health effects. And it's just pretty kind of an uncomfortable situation too. So inaccurate perceptions of ourselves and others is something that also happens from loneliness. Even though up to 40% of adults will experience loneliness in their lives, nearly all of them think poorly about themselves because of it. So the loneliness causes us to take a really harsh view of ourselves and our existing relationships and social interactions. And this kind of can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you kind of look at the relationships that are going well and are only identifying the negative parts of those, and so you can kind of find yourself in a little bit of a cycle of negativity. And then we talked about the loneliness as a relationship muscle that has become weak, and muscles, even your social skills muscles are kind of a use it or lose it experience. It can be really difficult to get back in the game, to re-engage in social interactions and connections once you've had that period of loneliness, because you're very cautious when you come back into it. Although those deep connections are really important to us, it can be very difficult to come back in. So the first treatment we have for that is we want to challenge those negative perceptions that we have about ourselves. So we can do this by trying to fight the pessimism. Loneliness makes our minds generate instant negative thoughts as soon as we even consider a social interaction. So we don't even really have to be in a social situation. We can just kind of imagine one, and we immediately come back with these negative thoughts from the loneliness. And then we envision ourselves failing before it even happens. So we want to fight this by purposefully visualizing scenarios where we're succeeding. But the most important part of this is that they have to be reasonable and realistic to us. So, imagining yourself whipping out Superman's cape and putting it on your body and flying away can be kind of fun, but it's not going to be reasonable or realistic, and so you're not really truly going to reap the benefits from believing that, from seeing that. So you want to make them realistic. Giving the benefit of the doubt. So loneliness makes us misinterpret how others perceive us also. So giving others the benefit of the doubt can help us to scale back on the negativity there too. So when you visualize social interactions, make sure you include the other person making realistic or positive responses to you. And sometimes you can review your social history and remember the positive interactions that you've had in the past to sort of remind yourself that you're capable of having those positive interactions, and that you can do that again. You can get back to that place, even if you're not feeling as comfortable there. So that's the first part of treatment A. The second part is to be as proactive as possible, so to take action, to do something. So we're going to do this by identifying potential avenues for connections, for those social connections. So go through your phone or your emails and make a list of the people who you consider to be your true friends or your true acquaintances. And for each one of those people, just make a mental note of the last time that you interacted with them, and then try to create maybe a list of, or a schedule of interacting with them in the future. So if you look back and you say, well, Aunt Martha is, a really great social connection that I have, but I haven't spoken with her in about a month. Maybe Aunt Martha would be the first one on your list to call in, check in, to create that opportunity for you to have that social connection. So you're going to want to then initiate plans. And initiating plans can, again, mean a phone call or a video chat or something like that if there's physical distance. And if you've found that, you're living in your new community and you still haven't made many local friends, you can still kind of go back and strengthen that relationship muscle by engaging in your previous relationships more frequently. But again, this has to be a very proactive thing. You have to initiate these plans, make a schedule. So you might really have to force yourself to kind of do these things. And then another thing you could do is search social media. This is an opportunity for social media to be our friend rather than our enemy. Search social media or local websites for opportunities to meet new people. So people that, the easiest would be to look for people that share your hobbies or your interests or your career. I know here in the U.S. we have Meetup.com is a platform for finding people that share our similar interests, whether it be fitness or spiritual interests or literature or things like that. So trying to find opportunities in there. And just to go back to mention spiritual again, oftentimes churches have groups of similarly aged, people can meet up, the young adults group or things like that. So you might find other opportunities in your spiritual community as well. Or recreational sports clubs are good. Most larger cities, at least here in the U.S., have those types of things. So you'd want to go and make a list of all the things that kind of interest you, groups that they have that kind of interest you, and then identify a couple of those, find the local groups, and then try to schedule to go to one per week. Or whatever would fit your schedule best, you know, 1 every 2 weeks or something like that. But and this is just an opportunity for you to get out there, to put yourself out there, but in a place where you already have a common interest with somebody. You already have the same hobby or the same spiritual life or the same career, things like that can make it a little bit easier to engage in the conversations and kind of set yourself up for success there. Okay, so the second treatment is kind of involves more looking inward. So this is kind of identifying the self-defeating behaviors that you might maybe have adopted as you kind of find yourself going a little deeper and deeper into the loneliness. And we want to identify those behaviors because loneliness can be that cycle, that self-fulfilling prophecy, and we got to kind of get ourselves out of that. So the loneliness makes us approach others with, you know, caution or suspicion. Because of the fear of the loneliness. And then that caution or suspicion, other people can see that. They can see our body language or the way that we're interacting with them. And when they see that, it might give them some anxiety and make them kind of retreat due to our awkwardness or maybe a bad vibe that we might be kind of setting off to them. And then, of course, if a rejection occurs in that situation, then we kind of go back in and conclude that the caution or the suspicion was warranted, and that's how the cycle is created. And then we come into the next social connection opportunity with that same kind of caution. So what we want to do here is to try to really be introspective and self-aware, and try to identify those things that we might be doing that could possibly be off-putting. This can be really difficult to do, to kind of admit to yourself that you're doing some of these really awkward things in social contexts, but very beneficial if you can identify them and then kind of try to avoid them in future, whether it be, if you've been pacing or something like that because of anxiety, maybe in the next opportunity for social interaction, try to sit down or something like that to try to keep yourself from doing that same behavior again. And again, great to highlight that this will take practice. It's it's a behavior that you've kind of started to do, so it's going to take some time for you to eliminate that behavior. So give yourself some grace and be patient with yourself also. Okay, and the second way or the third way, treatment C, is trying to take the other person's perspective during a social connection. So the loneliness and the isolation, it kind of weakens our ability to kind of change our perspective and to consider the other person. We kind of become even a little self-centered from the loneliness and just kind of meditate on our own experiences and our own evaluations of things. But perspective taking is kind of an important skill for a successful relationship. People want to know that we can be empathetic and that we can be understanding of the situation that they're in also. So when we're practicing taking the other person's perspective, we want to make sure also that we're taking into account just only that information that is accurate and relative. So things like body language and tone and things like that. We want to avoid taking in information that could be inaccurate, like gossip or stereotypes, because these things kind of keep us stuck in the negativity cycle. So we just want to pull in all that relevant information and see if we can just kind of imagine life from their perspective. Maybe imagine the anxiety that they too might be feeling, or some of the difficulties that they might be going into the situation with. And that can help us just focus more on the other person, focus on their words, focus on their reactions, instead of focusing so solely on ourselves. So again, another really important skill for relationships that takes practice when we've come out of practice with it. Also, to deepen that emotional bond, so empathy. I mentioned empathy in the taking of another person's perspective. What would you say is the difference between sympathy and empathy, if you could respond in the text box? Well, sometimes people use those words interchangeably, but they really do mean something different. So sympathy and empathy, one of the examples that I like to give to kind of show the difference between these two words is that you could see it in the difference between sending a card to a friend who has experienced a loss or a death, And that would be an example of sympathy. Versus coming up to that same friend, hugging them, crying with them at a funeral or at the place where you learn about the loss, and sort of really truly experiencing and understanding the grief that they're experiencing. And that would be an example of empathy, the latter would. So empathy is in a relationship just creates goodwill and affection and generosity, and you really do need that perspective taking to find that empathy for another person, to step into their shoes. So in this case, you're doing a visualization of just that, and you want to try to consider all of the relative information. Again, the context is key, the environment, their emotional state, their past experiences, which can be huge. And then convey your thoughts insightfully, be gentle, compassionate, and as descriptive as possible. Okay, so treatment D. This is another one that's pretty proactive, and we can use the social media again for good instead of evil. So create opportunities for the social connection. This is really very similar to the second part of treatment A, where we initiate plans and schedule them out to make sure that we'll follow through with them. So go online with a goal. So you know, it's sort of that mindless meandering of social media that can kind of cause us to have those negative feelings, or to further feel isolated, to further feel kind of out of the loop of our friends and family. But when we go online and onto social media with a goal, with a very specific goal, we can avoid the negativity and just kind of seek out what we came for. But loneliness does make us hesitant to do that, to create these opportunities. But the only way that we're going to really strengthen that relationship muscle and practice those skills is if we get ourselves back in the game, back into those social interactions. So for example, you could seek out make a goal for yourself. Like maybe you're interested in fitness, maybe you're interested in training for a triathlon in particular. So an example of something to do would be to go online and sign yourself up for a local training group as part of the training for your goal, but also meeting that goal socially. Again, it's, you know, you would have a hobby, you would have similar interests. It's a great kind of gateway into those interactions and to be able to practice those skills. And then another opportunity to connect with others is volunteering, finding locally opportunities to do something really positive in the community is helpful for your self-esteem, as well as you know, eliminating some of that loneliness, because often you're interacting with other workers or volunteers at the same time, and you're all there again for a common good, for a goal. It's something that you can walk away having experienced those social connections that feed us and help us use that relationship muscles, but also help us feeling like we've you know, done something really positive for the community, which is helpful for our self-esteem. So that's a really good one if it's one that you can find time for and opportunities for. Okay, and then treatment E, adopt a best friend. Raise your hand if you have a dog or a cat. Let me get my hand up here. I have a cat. I'm a cat lady. Love my cat. So if you're already a pet owner, you probably have already experienced some of the positive benefits, even emotionally, of animals, dogs and cats in particular. And dogs are great for soothing loneliness and isolation. You know, you walk in the door and nearly every time you walk in the door, they're very happy to see you. All you have to do is kind of give them a treat and they're even happier to see you. So that can really be just a source of positivity in your life if you're really struggling to make social connections in other areas too. So just being able to come home and know that you have the companionship of your animal can be really great. I will caution, of course, that pet ownership is a pretty serious commitment. So it's one that you really want to think on. You want to think about your family situation, your living situation, your potential to relocate with the military frequently. That does kind of complicate the pet situation. So just make sure you you know, think that one through pretty thoroughly beforehand. But a great option for people too. Okay, so that's what we have for loneliness here. So again, times when you would want to seek a professional for your for feelings of loneliness is, when the hopelessness and the isolation are really profound, and they're inhibiting other areas of your life and your ability to even really kind of complete these treatment tools that we have here today. Or if you're having thoughts of not wanting to be around anymore, we might also call those passive suicidal thoughts. Of course, thoughts of harming yourself or others seek immediate medical attention. So you're going to probably kind of see a theme on these slides where we talk about when to see a professional. And of course, at any time, if you're having thoughts of harming yourself or someone else, that's time to check in with a professional. Or really, if the psychological wound is just kind of taking over your life, taking over all areas of your life and affecting you, that would be another time, kind of universally, that you'd want to just go check in with a professional and be evaluated. Okay, so the third one is loss and trauma. Okay, I'm missing one, excuse me. Okay, so this is a huge one that is obviously experienced when you move or relocated for the military. You're losing all of those relationships, your schedule, your connections, all of the things that you had in your previous duty station. You're uprooted and you have to go somewhere else. So of course, it can this section, loss and trauma, it can include a spouse's profession while living abroad. Some of those opportunities are not there when you're in a very different environment or in an environment short term. And then, of course, that loss of community. And the thing about loss and trauma is it does take it takes some time. All of these things, kind of moving forward from loss and trauma, always do take time. So this, I will mention too that the skills in this section, when we say loss and trauma, the skills are really intended for people who are suffering, I hate to use this word, but I'd say lesser loss and trauma. So if you've been impacted by a very serious loss or a very serious trauma, you can check in with some of these tools and see if they're helpful for you, but I would say that you would probably want to check in with a professional also if something really profound has happened in your life. So I mentioned that it does take time to recover from loss and trauma, but there's sort of a silver lining there. There's the potential for post-traumatic growth, to come out of this situation of loss as a stronger or a more connected person. So when we're proactive and when we're putting together our emotional first aid kit, we want to increase the potential for that, of course. Okay, so loss and trauma involves a lot of interruptions all over many aspects of your life and of yourself. So your life is interrupted, of course, which involves emotional distress and grief. Sometimes your identity is interrupted, especially considering the position where you've temporarily lost your profession or your place of work. That's something that people kind of really identify with their profession and who they are. It becomes a part of who they are, and so losing that and changing gears and doing something different can be a pretty big shock. Sometimes your beliefs are interrupted. It kind of challenges your perceptions of the world or the way the world is, the way you sort of envision the world sometimes. And then, of course, your relationships can be interrupted, and you're struggling to kind of connect with the people who remain and sometimes get caught up in the past and there's that trouble with living in the now, living in the future. So to start out your treatment, I feel like there's always one thing that people say to one another, whether they're a professional or just a well-meaning friend, when somebody has experienced a loss and trauma. And that thing that I always hear is, you should really talk about it, or saying, I'm here if you need to talk. And these are examples of really well-meaning support, but the flip side of that is they can make us feel pressured to talk about what has happened. And some people find that to be really helpful, but some people do not find that to be as helpful. So when you're looking to soothe your emotional pain, you want to know yourself and you want to do it your way. If you don't feel like you're ready to talk, don't pressure yourself to do that just yet. I would caution you not to just completely kind of pretend that the loss didn't happen or pretend that it didn't exist. But if talking isn't best for you, another option could be writing a letter or or writing an email or doing some type of visual art activity to help you kind of work through where you are right now. So just be aware of what works best for you, and don't feel that pressure because it's not necessary in moving through the loss if it doesn't work for you. And then consider, sort of trying to rediscover some lost aspects of yourself. So perhaps, kind of continuing on with the example of the lost profession. So you're unable to engage in your profession anymore. But what are the other aspects of yourself that you value and that you like and that you find to be important? Maybe this is a time in life to start to meditate on those things and to reconnect to those things. So in this exercise, you make a list of those qualities that you value about yourself. You kind of ask yourself, which qualities you feel more disconnected to right now, and then you make a list of possible outlets to sort of try to reconnect to those parts of yourself. So following on with the example, maybe you can't engage in your profession anymore, but you used to really enjoy painting, and maybe this is an opportunity for you to refine things like that in your life that can still help you feel that life is enjoyable and that you are valuable and important. And then treatment C, try to find meaning in loss. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, but it's a really wonderful book about finding meaning in loss and trauma and sort of his personal experiences in a concentration camp as a psychologist, in fact. So very great book. If you're interested, go ahead and pick it up. It's a short read. But in that book, he does some things that this exercise talks about too. And when we find meaning, we're looking to do two distinct things in two distinct phases. So we're sense making, so we're trying to make sense of what happened, and then we're trying to find a potential benefit in what happened. So benefit finding is that ability to find the silver lining in things and then this is that place where you can kind of identify that post-traumatic growth, or you have the opportunity for that. And then sense making is our ability to fit the event that happened into our already existing framework of beliefs and assumptions. But it's that benefit finding that's really, really valuable to us. And in this exercise where you're imagining yourself 10 years from now, and then you're kind of completing these phrases in sort of like an essay format. So this is another good exercise that would work well in a journal, something that you could even revisit and meditate on that positivity and the benefits that can come out of the loss that you experienced. Okay, and then when to see a professional for this one. If you experience any symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, things like flashbacks, nightmares, emotional numbness, jumpiness, agitation, you would definitely want to check in with a professional for that. Or if these treatments don't improve your emotional pain, or again, those thoughts of hurting yourself or someone else, you would want to check in with. I'll also mention that in his book, Dr. Winch gives more tools than I've represented in this PowerPoint here, but I tried to keep this presentation very relevant to military relocation. But somebody who's experienced other types of loss and trauma might find some of those other activities really helpful that are in his book. So just another plug for the book. It's really, really good. Okay. Number 4 is guilt. And I'll try to keep us moving and be mindful of the time a little bit. And again, we will receive this PowerPoint presentation in our email, so you can go back and look at the ones that are really relevant to you. in the future too. So unhealthy guilt, some unresolved guilt, survivor guilt, or separation guilt are some examples of guilt, and it's that unresolved guilt that is actually the most common and often the most damaging. You know, a guilt that we might feel from military relocation is the guilt of, you know, moving children from one location to another. Perhaps your children were doing really well in their previous duty location, and in your new location, they are struggling to make that transition and to readjust. Perhaps their expectations are different in their school systems or sports or with friends. And, you know, we as parents can feel guilt for having moved our child into this more difficult time. But that's also just another example of how, you know, often as a parent or an adult, in general, we kind of have to make the best decision with the available options that are there for us, even when all of the options create difficulty or problems. But even with that said, that doesn't change the guilt you can sometimes feel from making that decision. So one way to treat guilt is to practice effective apology, and this is just a good reminder for us all. This treatment tool is more effective for those who feel guilty because they have done something and it has caused harm or discord in someone else's life. So being able to kind of circle back around and really truly apologizing to that person is often the first step in resolving that guilt that you have regarding the situation. So after you've apologized to the other person, if something has occurred, the second part is to learn to forgive yourself. And this treatment, we actually have 2 slides for this one because there's 2 parts to this. And I'll say also that self-forgiveness is a process. It's not necessarily a decision. It's a decision to start the process, but keep in mind and give yourself grace along the way because it truly is a process. And in cases where we have done something wrong, it doesn't mean that our behavior was acceptable or forgotten. It just means that we can come to peace with it and resolve the guilt that we feel over it. You know, and then in cases where we've just made the best choice with the information we had and where problems still arose, we can kind of try to put that situation into better perspective and review some of those extenuating circumstances. So I'd say that's the most important part there, is reviewing the extenuating circumstances. So the first step would be that accountability and evaluating those extenuating circumstances. And then the second part is to sort of balance the scale, to take action to atone for whatever problem you have created, or whether you have actually created it or you just feel that you've created it. For example, if you're a parent who does feel guilty about relocating your child because they're struggling with their coursework in their new school, maybe you would consider getting that child a tutor to help the child feel more confident with the material. And really, just by being proactive and doing that, you can kind of feel within yourself that you've tried your best to make it right, and you can move forward with that self-forgiveness. Okay, and then when to consult a professional if that excessive guilt is just really impairing your quality of life, or again, if you're having those thoughts of harming yourself or others. Okay, rumination, back to this great word, rumination. So we're going to define that as, you know, like picking apart, replaying, meditating on the same negative situation repeatedly. And often this comes with our thoughts, so we're having just repeated thoughts that are negative in nature about a situation. Oftentimes something that has happened in the past, we're just replaying it, but we're not really getting anywhere with it. It's just we're just kind of stuck. And then rumination is typically a problem that I personally see paired with some other issues, and some of those other issues can be guilt or excessive anger or low self-esteem. But the ruminating actually only sort of deepens our emotional distress and deepens the anger or deepens the guilt or the sadness that we're experiencing. So regarding the anger, you know, repeatedly venting angry situation causes us to feel more angry about it, not better. So that's something that can kind of heighten our irritability in general and then cause us to overreact to other situations as well. So it can kind of impair us that way. Cognitive leakage, this refers to problems with attention, concentration, problem solving, motivation, taking initiative. The thoughts just sort of start to take over other areas of our mind also. And then in relationships, we often kind of fail to consider how this constant negativity and venting and ruminating is affecting the people that are closest to us, the people that are often listening to it. Okay, so the first treatment recommendation is to try to change your perspective. So because you're caught in your own mind, you're caught in your own account of the situation that you experienced. So what you want to do is try to get yourself out of your own mind. You want to be in that third person perspective. So this is a visualization, so you can sit with your eyes closed and visualize the scene and try to zoom out like a fly on the wall or, a cup on a table or something, and view yourself within the scene as it's happening. And try to view the scene this way every time it tries to kind of come back into your mind. And by doing this, it can help you sort of have a better understanding of why something happened instead of always having to focus on how it happened, which is what the ruminating thoughts tend to be, is just how, a little bit of a laundry list of how something occurred. Another thing you can do is to distract yourself from the emotional pain, distract yourself from the thoughts. And so suppressing the thoughts doesn't work. We don't want to shove them down and pretend they're not there. But if you're finding that it's just extremely painful to keep having these thoughts, distraction can help you in the moment. So we call these distraction skills or coping skills, and they're kind of a great way to force your energy away from the negative thoughts or feelings into something that's neutral or positive. So an example of some distraction skills would be taking a shower, calling a friend, reading a book, cooking, cleaning, doing a math problem, things like that. In fact, it's helpful to kind of go ahead and make a little list of options for distraction skills, things that you think might work for you. Also, just reminders, you're making this list to try to engage your senses, touching a soft fabric can sometimes help distract people. Eating a strong flavored snack, those kinds of things can really help just distract the brain, bring it back to something neutral or positive. So an example of this would be if you find that you are often ruminating in your car while you're commuting, make a list of your distraction skills and then find ones that you can do in your car, because of course we can't do all skills everywhere. We can't just walk away from our job and take a shower. We can't just walk away from our children's soccer practice and go read a book all the time. So you'll want to make it very specific to what's the situation that you find yourself ruminating in the most, and then what distraction skills are appropriate for that situation. So while you're in the car commuting, you can listen to music or your favorite podcast or an audiobook or something that engages you. If you find at nighttime when you're laying down before you're going to bed, this is another time that people say the thoughts kind of come back and they're focused in on them. You could try praying or reading a book or something that would be appropriate late at night, so that you'll kind of naturally bring yourself to a sleeping point also. So if it's anger that you're struggling with your ruminating, you want to try to reframe the anger event. And this again is kind of trying to put some perspective in this, trying to kind of get yourself out of yourself, having some empathy, having some understanding for all the aspects of the event or what occurred. And so remember that it's that repeated venting that can actually be harmful for us and cause us to just kind of keep reliving something that painfully happened. But if we don't just repeat it, but we instead try to reframe it, we can formulate a new interpretation of the event, and that's more positive and can cause those positive feelings. So again, you're going back in and you're focusing on the positive. And then also just a reminder to kind of go easy on your friends. We kind of mentioned that it can impact the relationships that you do have that are strong, because those are the people that are oftentimes the one that we're going to vent to repeatedly. And you know, it does kind of take a toll on our friends' patience and their compassion, and sometimes it can make them feel resentful towards us. So you just want to be mindful of kind of using your friends repeatedly to vent. You want to try to avoid that. So just being intentional about your conversation with your friends, and being mindful that they don't kind of return back to the ruminating thoughts that you're experiencing. So when to see a professional, rumination is strongly tied to depression. So if you're experiencing depressive symptoms, see a health professional to be evaluated. Again, if they're invading all areas of your life, if you're having thoughts of harming yourself or someone else, you would need to seek immediate professional help. Okay, so failure. Failure is such a universal thing that some of these things happen more often to people than others, but failure is just one of those things that we all experience. In fact, we've been failing since we were born, because failure is a part of our learning process. It's a part of the early learning process, but it's also a part of the learning process as an adult in your more advanced roles, professionally, personally, and things like that. So every human experiences failure repeatedly. And there's lots of opportunities to experience failure when we're starting over again, due to a relocation from the military. So the problem with failure is it can make our goals seem like they're out of our reach, can make us feel kind of demoralized. It can cause us to feel kind of helpless, kind of passive, and then it damages our self-esteem, of course. And we tend to make some negative generalizations sometimes based on the failure. Failure and rejection are of course, very much tied together, so you might notice a little bit of overlap in some of the materials or the concepts here. So the first treatment tool here is to try to get support and to learn from your failure. So to try to apply these phrases that give sort of a positive twist to failure to your specific situation. This is another activity that would be really great to do in a journal. But again, you want to, whenever you're doing these journal activities, you want to make it as specific as you possibly can to your individual situation. And then for B, focus on the factors that you can control. Oftentimes failure makes us feel like we were out of control, that we were unable to control the situation appropriately, and that's why we failed. And then that's why we take it very personally. So one way that we can feel better about that is to do things that kind of foster the control, to show ourselves that we can be in control and we can succeed. So focusing on what we can control, that just has a huge positive impact on your motivation, your hope, and your self-esteem. I would say also that it's best to focus on one goal at a time, and so you could create a list of goals, but then apply this exercise to each different goal, just to go ahead and set yourself up for success in that department. Okay, another thing we can do is just kind of take responsibility and own the fear. Try to normalize the emotions that come along with the failure, and just kind of own it. And once you do that, you might find yourself a little bit more at peace. So then, again, this is writing in your journal about the fear, but be sure after you've meditated on the fear and owning it a little bit to try to work in some of that positivity and some more optimistic assessments of the situation also, so that it's not totally a negative meditation at the time. So you can do this in a journal, or you can also talk through this with a trusted family member or friend. And humor, of course, is huge. It's a great distraction skill. It's just a great thing to try to insert into your daily life to bring you just sort of little joys. So make sure you're keeping things funny for yourself. And then this specifically is for people that experience performance anxiety, so things like test anxiety, or specific task-related anxiety. And then we kind of come back into those distraction skills we talked about earlier. Again, you'd want to personalize this for the test or for the environment that you would be taking the test or performing the task. So whistling can help, mumbling can help. If you're in a place where you're unable to do that, you might need to come up with some other things that you can do sort of more mentally. A great one is deep breathing. This is one that you can kind of do anywhere, all the time, and kind of forces your body, physiologically to relax. And so then just a reminder of a deep breath. Typically, we breathe very shallow in our day-to-day life, where our chest is raising and lowering. So when we do the deep breath, we want to make sure it's our stomach that's raising and lowering as we take those deep breaths, and we're taking them slowly. So counting to 5, holding the breath, and then counting to 5 to release. So things like that can be very helpful. And then again, when to see a professional is the symptoms of depression, you're feeling just incredible hopelessness, shame, or if the performance anxiety is just really getting in the way of your necessary tasks, of your ability to perform your jobs, you might want to check in with a professional. And of course, the thoughts of hurting yourself or others. All right, and then this is our last one here, the lower self-esteem, and I thank you everybody for hanging in there with me. I'll keep moving through this one as well to try to respect everybody's time as best as possible. This is a lot of material here. Okay, so lower self-esteem, with it can leave us with a greater psychological vulnerability to even minor rejections or failures or disappointments. So when our self-esteem is low, we feel the blow of the rejections and the failures even greater. So it kind of amplifies the small stuff in our lives, and really, we're obviously taking those things very personally and probably blowing them out of proportion a little bit. We're also kind of resisting the positive messages that we're receiving, so we're kind of just so stuck in the negative way of thinking about ourselves that it makes us almost unable to receive these positive this positive input from our loved ones, which is such a shame, because these are the very things that could kind of help build us back up, but we're just so kind of stuck in that negativity and in that cycle. And it makes us feel disempowered. We feel like we're unable to set limits and boundaries. We kind of let people walk all over us at times because we're lacking that really essential love and respect for ourselves. And I think lots of people find themselves unfortunately in this place at different points in life, especially if they're experiencing repeated rejections or failures or guilt, or all these other things that we've talked about can kind of snowball and lead to this lowered self-esteem. So for the first treatment thing they have here is to try to adopt some self-compassion and silence those critical voices in your head. So this is a written exercise that you can do below, and it's over the course of a couple days. And what you do in this exercise, which I really, really like, is you imagine that you have a friend who has also experienced the same kind of rejection or failure that you have experienced, that has led you to believe these negative things about yourself. And you talk to this friend in a letter form, and you talk to them kindly, because that's how we would talk to a friend if they had experienced the same thing that we had experienced. But we often don't show that same compassion to ourselves. So this kind of forces you to try to, again, change that perspective, come at it from a different angle, and sort of see the compassion, see where the compassion should be. For you, for yourself. So identify your strengths and affirm them. Affirm your valuable traits about yourself, the things that you already believe. So oftentimes when people have lower self-esteem, a recommendation that's made to them is to kind of listen in on these positive affirmations, which can be really great for people, but the problem comes in if people are just kind of in such a low place that they really just can't connect these really incredibly positive phrases to themselves. when they're not sort of able to make the connection between themselves and an extremely positive phrase. So one way to kind of start down the positive affirmation path is to start small and to start with believable traits about yourself. So maybe you're in a really low place and you can't really confidently and believably say, I am a great person, but you can say, you know, I'm really good at making a peanut butter sandwich or something much smaller, but it's something that you really truly believe. So that's a great place to start, is those things that are already believable about yourself. Ideally, you'd want to make them a little bit more meaningful than making a peanut butter sandwich, but then, you know, just to show that you know, you can kind of start small there. And meditate on those things that are believable to you. Because otherwise, when we listen to, sometimes when someone with lower self-esteem listens to those positive affirmation tapes, it can almost make them feel worse about themselves because the statements feel so unbelievable to them. They really just cannot connect them to themselves. So starting small, starting with believable things that positive things they can see in themselves today is a good place to start. And then also to increase your tolerance for compliments. When our self-esteem is low, it's really hard to take compliments from people. It can feel just very uncomfortable even if someone compliments us. So, so in this exercise, you think about a time when you were complimented by a friend or family and you kind of describe the incident and what made that person feel positively. And then you kind of try to take whatever compliment they gave you and say, you know, what does that attribute mean to me? You know, if someone said, you know, you're just such a great listener, really kind of thinking about it and saying, well, yeah, listening is an important attribute and it is something that I do well. And then talking about how it can benefit you in your relationships and how that skill that you do well benefits you in your real life. So then increasing your personal empowerment, and this is an area where you can, you know, this is kind of a call to action also. So think about the aspects of life that make you frustrated and list some of them, and then, you know, also rank order these to the highest likelihood of success. And then that list becomes a list of your new goals. And so you want to make sure that you do the rank ordering for the ones that are you're most likely to succeed in, because when you start in with this, you want to kind of set yourself up for success again. You want to start in with something that can help you regain that feeling of self-control and you know, to come back in and believe that you are capable of setting a goal and completing a task. So this is a great place for like maybe New Year's resolutions, even to make it a little timely for right now. So these are really your goals for self-improvement, but that are very practical and realistic. So again, improving that self-control, and you do this by maintaining your muscles. Make sure you have a full tank. It helps increase personal empowerment and makes progress towards your goals. It functions like a muscle, and so that muscle can become fatigued. So the more you take action towards your goals, the more empowered and in control you kind of feel. So it again kind of becomes a cycle. You strengthen that muscle. You start feeling that confidence building. And again, when to see a professional, when the treatments are not yielding results to you, when you're still impacted in your daily life, or when you're you know, having thoughts of harming yourself or others. And that is everything, ladies and gentlemen. So just to conclude, you know, adjusting to life transitions is difficult and it takes time and it takes grace. So please be giving yourselves and your clients that grace. You know, and we all experience rejection, loneliness, loss, guilt, rumination, failure, and low self-esteem. We all at one point in time will experience these things. But you can actively repair your damaged emotional health using these tools and using them often, and also by increasing your self-care, so making sure you're getting enough sleep at night, that you're eating 3 meals a day, you're getting exercise. That's another way to kind of build up yourself and to help your mental health by increasing your physical health. And also, of course, know when to seek a professional and when you've kind of hit your limit with things and when you need to outsource. That's just a part of taking care of yourself. We would do that with a physical ailment any day of the week, so make sure you're giving yourself the same standards for your mental health. And I'd love for you all to run out and get this book. It's really great. You've basically seen an abridged version of it today, but like I mentioned during the loss and trauma section, there are additional tools for that section in particular, and then just more examples he gives of clients that he's had personally, so you can kind of see how each of these might manifest in somebody, what that might look like for you or for a client that you have. So it's a really great book. And then Man's Search for Meaning is also a really powerful book as well. And that is everything. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. And if anyone has questions, I'd love to answer them to the best of my ability.